There are towns in the Appalachian Mountains that don't feel empty. They feel like something ended there. Not all at once. Not for a single reason. Just left behind. In some of these places, the industry disappeared. In others, people were forced out. And one town still lives without the modern world on purpose. These aren't just ghost towns, which makes them harder to explain than they should be. Thurmond. There's a town in West Virginia where the trains still run. They just don't stop anymore. Thurmond used to be one of the busiest rail towns in Appalachia. Coal moved through it constantly. The platform was crowded, the storefronts were full, and the whole place ran on the energy of something in motion. Hotels filled on weekends. Warehouses stacked freight. Banks counted the money coal generated. It wasn't a small outpost, it was a real, functioning center of commerce. Then steam gave way to diesel. Diesel meant fewer stops. And fewer stops meant that small stations like Thurmond's, stations that had once given the whole line its rhythm, got quietly removed from the schedule. Not shut down, just skipped. Today, the tracks still run directly through the center of town. Close enough that when a freight train passes, you feel the air move. You can stand on the same platform that once received passengers from across the region and watch hundreds of cars roll through loaded, moving, going somewhere, and none of it has anything to do with Thurmond. The hotels are silent, the storefronts are boarded, almost no one lives here permanently, and yet Thurmond is still legally incorporated, still on the maps, still technically a functioning municipality in West Virginia. Rangers from the National Park Service walk the streets occasionally. Tourists come in, take photos of the empty buildings, and leave. The trains keep passing the way they always have, indifferent, continuous. The difference is that nothing gets off. Nuttallburg. You can't drive to Nuttallburg. There's no road left. What used to be the main approach to this West Virginia coal town is now a hiking trail through the New River Gorge. It's a narrow path that drops steadily into a valley. The surrounding hills seem almost reluctant to reveal. On an overcast day, light only reaches the bottom for a few hours. It feels like the kind of place that wants to stay hidden. 100 years ago, none of that mattered. Nuttallburg was a working coal operation. Hundreds of workers, company housing, a general store, and an elaborate conveyor system that carried coal from the mine entrance high on the hillside all the way down to the railroad tracks at the river. It was self-contained. It didn't need much from the outside world, and the outside world mostly left it alone. When the mine stopped turning a profit, the company packed up and left. The workers followed. The road fell apart without anyone to maintain it. The conveyor rusted in place. What the trail leads to now is less a town than the memory of one. The machinery is still there. Huge rusted wheels, rotting wooden chutes, structures too heavy to move and apparently not worth the effort. Foundations mark where the houses were. The company store's walls still partially stand, though the roof is gone and trees have grown up through the floor. The deeper you walk in, the more it feels like the forest has been quietly cataloging everything left behind, incorporating the ruins, pulling them slowly back into the canopy. There are no signs telling you what to feel. You figure it out from the land itself, from the flat spaces between the trees that are too regular to be natural and the rusted metal that's too deliberate to be anything but human. Lost Cove. Lost Cove is hard to find, which makes a certain kind of sense. For most of its existence, it was hard to leave too. The community sits in a high hollow in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest. The only way in now is a trail that climbs several miles through the trees. At its peak, around the turn of the last century, about 100 people lived here, farming, hunting, building a life that was almost entirely self-contained. No electricity, no running water beyond the creek, no connection to the outside world except a railroad that came through the valley below, occasionally carrying supplies and sometimes people. For a while, that was enough. Communities like Lost Cove weren't unusual in the southern Appalachians. They'd grown up at a distance from the larger economy and developed their own rhythms in response. The isolation wasn't always felt as isolation. It was just home. But the railroad got less frequent. Supplies got harder to predict. And as the rest of the 20th century took shape around them, highways, electricity, modern medicine, the math of staying in Lost Cove started to shift. People left not because of any single disaster. They left because the reasons to stay kept shrinking. A child who needed a real school, a family member who needed a doctor, a younger generation standing on the ridge, looking down at the valley, and deciding to go. By the late 1950s, the last residents were gone. If you manage to find Lost Cove today, you won't find a town. You'll find what a town leaves behind: stone chimneys standing alone in clearings, shallow depressions where root cellars used to be, terraces cut into the hillside that were once gardens. The forest has grown back over almost everything. There's a quality to the silence here that's hard to name. It's not the silence of somewhere no one has ever been. It's the silence of somewhere people lived and left, and the land absorbed the absence so completely that only the shape of things remains. Fontana Dam. In the 1940s, the federal government built one of the largest dams in the eastern United States in a narrow valley in western North Carolina. Nearly 500 feet of concrete, a reservoir stretching back for almost 30 miles. Everything below the waterline was left behind. Over 1,000 families were displaced to make room, many of them the descendants of people who had been farming these valleys for generations. They were told the project was necessary, wartime electricity demands. No other viable site, they received compensation and were told to go. Some of them were also told that a road would be built along the shoreline of the new lake, a road that would reconnect the communities the water had cut off. It would pass through a tunnel in the mountain and link what remained of the surrounding area to the Hazel Creek settlements that the reservoir had isolated. The tunnel was built. The road was never finished. Locals call it the road to nowhere. It runs about 6 miles from a parking area into the mountains, passes through that completed tunnel, and just ends. In the middle of the forest, the project it was part of was quietly abandoned, the road left exactly as it was unfinished, pointing in a direction you can never actually reach by following it. If you stand at the edge of Fontana Lake on a calm day, it looks peaceful. Still water, the ridges reflected back up at you. But underneath that surface, the old roads are still there, the foundations of houses, cemetery walls. The outline of a valley that wasn't emptied by time or economics, it was emptied by a decision made by people who were never going to have to live with what came after. The dam still produces power. The valley it replaced is still down there. Cataloochee. Cataloochee Valley is not easy to reach by accident. The road in is narrow, rough in places, and winds through so many switchbacks that by the time the valley finally opens up in front of you, it feels like you had to earn it, like the landscape made a decision to let you through. Families settled here for generations. At its height in the early 1900s, the valley held several hundred people: farmers, tradespeople, a school, 2 churches, orchards, and cornfields across the valley floor. It wasn't isolated in the way Lost Cove was. There were roads in, there was trade with nearby communities. People had been building lives here long enough that the place had a real continuity to it. Then, in the 1930s, the federal government began acquiring land for what would become Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The process wasn't simple. Some landowners sold willingly, others were pressured. Some held on for years, filing objections, negotiating extensions, doing everything they could to stay. By the early 1940s, the last residents were gone. The Park Service preserved some of the buildings: a white-painted Methodist church, a 2-room schoolhouse, a few farmhouses. They're still standing in the valley today, structurally intact, occasionally restored, and completely empty. No one holds services in the church. No children attend the school. The houses have furniture in them, period objects arranged in the rooms, belonging to no one who actually lived there. What moved into the space the families left is elk. Reintroduced to the Smokies after more than a century's absence, the herd has grown to several hundred animals. In the mornings and evenings especially, they come out into the open fields, the same fields those families once cleared and worked, and graze. They don't know, obviously, what this valley used to hold. But watching them move between the empty buildings and the open meadows, it's hard not to feel the weight of the exchange. The valley is full again. It's just not full of what it was. Green Bank. Green Bank, West Virginia, is not a dying town. That's worth saying up front, because it's different from everywhere else on this list. No industry collapsed here, no reservoir swallowed it, no government displacement, no slow exodus. Green Bank is strange for a completely different reason. There are no cell towers here. Wi-Fi is severely limited. Bluetooth, certain kinds of motors, microwave ovens, all either restricted or banned outright in parts of town. The modern communications infrastructure that the rest of the country treats as background noise simply does not exist in Green Bank. This isn't an accident. Greenbank sits inside the National Radio Quiet Zone, a vast region where radio frequency emissions are controlled by federal law. The reason is a massive radio telescope that operates in the valley, one of the largest steerable telescopes on Earth. It's designed to listen for signals from distant galaxies, pulsars, and deep space phenomena, and it needs near total electromagnetic silence to work. Even a stray Wi-Fi signal, even certain engine types, can corrupt the data it's trying to collect. So the quiet is protected by law. People have adapted in different ways. Some moved here specifically because of it, people who find the connected world too much, or who wanted something slower. Others were born here and have simply never known a different kind of life. There are landlines, wired internet exists in some places. The modern world isn't entirely absent. But something is different when you're there. The background hum that follows you everywhere else, that constant low-level sense of being reachable, trackable, connected, is gone. Public spaces don't feel the way public spaces usually feel. Whether that's a loss or a relief probably says more about you than it does about Greenbank. The telescope keeps listening, turning slowly. The universe, it turns out, has a lot to say, and Greenbank is one of the few places quiet enough to hear it. These 6 places share a mountain range and almost nothing else. Thurmond was bypassed, Nuttallburg was abandoned, Lost Cove was quietly outlasted, Fontana's Valley was drowned by design, Cataloochee was cleared for preservation, and Greenbank chose in its own way to stay outside the current of modern life. Not because the current couldn't reach it, but because something more important required the silence. In each case, the landscape absorbed what happened and kept going. The trains still run through Thurmond, the elk still graze in Cataloochee, the telescope in Greenbank still turns toward the sky. The mountains don't register any of this as loss. That part is carried by the people who remember.